You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing bread drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing light.
Hello and welcome to Dark Loops, the Seers of Ardham, a podcast in which we, the Seers of Ardham, discuss HBO's fantastic new series, Lovecraft Country. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. Tonight we discuss episode 6, Meet Me in Daegu. Joining me in tonight's discussion are the other members of the Order. Brothers and sisters, please introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little something about who you are. And we will start with Leandra.
Hi, I'm Leandra Parris. I'm a assistant professor of school psychology at William & Mary, and I do work around crisis intervention, trauma-informed care, and social justice in school systems. And yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. Byron.
I am Dr. Byron Craig. I'm an assistant professor at School of Communication at Illinois State University. And I work on race, trauma, and rhetoric.
Fantastic. Cianna.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. I am a Baltimore-based radio producer, podcast producer, and media junkie.
It's fantastic. Stanford.
I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist coming to you out of Chicago.
And Vanessa.
I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz, licensed clinical psychologist here in the Milwaukee area, also a professor of psychology at Alverno College.
Fantastic. So, who would like to start with comments about this week's episode? Favorite character, favorite line, favorite scene?
I don't like war criminal tick. I don't know. They kind of like threw that in there and then just sort of
Yes. And that's the
glazed over it like we weren't supposed to notice.
Well, I
It's
mean,
very strange.
in my younger days, I just decided to up and shoot someone in the head.
I
That was
just
just something I had to grow out of.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was
come
just
on.
very, very weird. And that's
Right.
one you can't really blame on your dad, but he tried anyway, and it was just very.
I don't think you can blame that on the anthology format either, right? Because
Nope.
they had to have some character continuity. They had to know how, each episode was going to influence the character. And I saw the scene. You see him shoot the woman, and then you see him there while they're torturing the person, pulling the tooth out of their mouth. And my immediate reaction was, they're trying to make him Killmonger? What are they trying to do here? What?
Right.
And I'm not saying that stuff doesn't happen. I'm not saying there may not be, that maybe this is his Montrose side that we haven't seen.
I needed a little bit more development. I mean, it just was very, very jarring. And then his relationship with Jihan, I don't know.
Well, that's
They
what we're
liked
here
Judy
for.
Garland, and that made everything okay. It was just weird. I don't know. It was just, I don't know. I don't like it.
I think Garland makes everything okay.
Exactly.
I was taken back that he didn't have more of a hesitation. I was like,
Right.
he's gonna get a look on his face. We're gonna see, and he's such a great actor. He could totally do that, right? A moment of I have to do this and I don't want to. He did not. It was just straight. I'm doing what I have to. He had a hateful look on his face, and both of the flashbacks that you were talking about, it was not in line with the Atticus that we've seen so far, right?
Well, and adding on to it, when he got called on it by Jihad, one of his responses was, well, you have no idea how many lives I saved. In that moment, when called on it, he was like, yeah, I did it. And wouldn't anybody else? I mean, it didn't even set up him later coming back and feeling bad about it. And one of the things I thought was really, and I'm gonna say this is one of the downsides of an anthology format, right? Is it because you have different people working on different episodes, but it creates such a huge problem, at least for me, for the character, because now what they've done is there's how can I describe it? Let me rewind. Every story is a promise. every story. Every story starts off, we call it a thesis, but it's not really a thesis. It's a promise. It's a promise between the storyteller and the listener. And part of the promise of Lovecraft Country has been sort of looking at this intersection between terror, trauma, and race, right? Well, now we find out that, you know, it was told to us that Tick was dealing with PTSD issues, but we're really here to deal with sort of this intersection of race and trauma. Now we've added the fact that, oh yeah, he's kind of a reformed militaristic serial killer. You know, at that point, how do we even begin to really talk about the intersection of race and trauma? They could have, they had an opportunity where if they had taken that scene out and they could have made his time in Korea that intersection where he's trying to sort out being an African-American out there having to kill other people of color, that would have fed perfectly into race and trauma. But no, it's really about him getting over killing people in like the most
it feeds into a type of race and trauma. I think we can't say that we're no longer talking about race and trauma because the story is centering East Asian people, a Black man and his actions in South Korea. That's still very much, in my opinion, at the intersection of race and trauma. I mean, it just really meanders down a completely different slope that I don't think anybody really saw coming. But I think it's still very much, you know, the story is still very much at the center of race and trauma, but...
Well, what about the line later where Jiha's trying to explain to him that he came to this country to escape his father, and look what this war did to him. In other words, all those lines are intentional. Sure, her saying that to him, the scenes of him torturing and murdering people, I don't know if the writers were trying to say, war does this to anybody, right? And so there was a stark contrast between the amount of agency you saw him expressing in those scenes where he shoots the person and he's standing there while they're being tortured. That's his agency. And then her comment about the war and tearing him apart is like the context in which that agency is struggling. And they didn't put all that stuff together in a way that I felt really made you sense that tension in him. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about there, Stanford, is that there's no sense of tension in him as to should I do this or not. There's no looking around to see what anyone else is doing. There's no ambiguity. It's just boom. And
did they use makeup or CGI to make him look younger?
I have no idea.
In this episode, did anybody notice? Or maybe it's just because he's smiling a lot, especially around Jiha. He's got this very sort of naive, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed sort of air about him. I'm not sure if they used CGI or makeup, but he did come off aesthetically looking about 10 or 15 years younger.
He did have many more smiles on his face in this episode than he usually does.
And I think to your point, Scott, also one thing that I actually did like is a stretch about this episode, which I absolutely think was like a palate cleanser, because it was like, I think the most straightforward up until the end there of like anything that we've seen all season. But one thing I did appreciate was I feel like it was a more realistic depiction of war and war crimes, because I think, especially in America, we like, what's the word? Like it's
we embellish.
It's just like war. It's so great. We're doing all this stuff to help everyone,
right.
And like even when you see the Americans come in and they're like, "We're here to help you," and they're like throwing pamphlets. I think it was just a much. I did appreciate that it wasn't war like in the movies you see, like American Sniper, where it's like, "Oh, look at this hero, he's so great." You know what I'm saying? I appreciated that perspective, but I agree with Stanford that it was kind of like, okay, whoa, like what is happening? Like we see Tick, like if that whole scene would have happened and he would have been like on the periphery, or you know, we see him later, but the fact that it was just a lot. I don't know.
So I think so I'm gonna, maybe I'll be the outcast here. I absolutely loved this episode. I love the fact that it takes this show and and I'm starting to really love the fact that each episode is almost its own thing. And so I actually like that because I saw this episode being about, again, I saw the theme of this interrupted woman in this episode. And for me, I didn't really think so much about Tick as much as I thought about Jiha and Judy Garland. Right? And I think the way that they used Judy Garland throughout this episode, I thought was really smart because it really made you, for me, it made me think about, how we, and I think, Vanessa, I guess I would say the term I would use to think about the way we portray war is especially in films of that era, as romanticized.
Yes.
Right? From a romanticized film. And I think what this episode did for me was to take that and turn it on its head and really talk about that trauma of war. And for me, that really hit home in the end with the Judy Garland dialogue that we were hearing, right? That made me think about so many things. It made me think about because when they're about to watch, when she's in the movie theater and they're about to watch Easter Parade, Easter Parade, because they watch Summer Stock when she and Tick watch Summer Stock. But when she's in the theater and we see the propaganda, right? Little reel that's playing before the film starts. And it makes me think about how we think about these kind of the monsters, right? This is an episode where I saw the playing out of the supernatural more than any of the other episodes from this series so far, and how that supernatural plays a role in ways that maybe we don't acknowledge so much, right? So the supernatural in love, the supernatural in sex, the supernatural in the cultural differences, right? And how this episode played with the cultural differences that Jihad just really, I think, was striving for, right? But the cultural, the political, the romantic, I think was all there. And, she's having to deal with also being the enemy, right? So what, like Bob Ivy would call this, this demonizing of the other, right? And so it takes on a whole nother level if we think about this demonizing of her as also in this creature being inside of her, right? Or this spirit being inside of her. And so there's this whole demonizing that's going on there because this is other in her. So I guess for me, I didn't think so much about Tick in this episode as much as I thought about Jiha so much, right? Because I think she plays an important role in the outcome of whatever's going to happen with Tick. I think she plays an important role. So for me to get that origin story of her was really important. And I understand, I've read some articles about some people saying some of the portrayal was, representation was problematic. And I want to go back and look at that more, but I guess I just saw this kind of play on torture and whiteness and this interruption again. Because I think in a lot of ways, I think this episode is kind of making fun of the romanticizing of whiteness in Hollywood, right? And remember, this is how Jiha is trying to, that creature is learning about love through these Judy Garland films. But in the end, we see how tortured Judy Garland was as a soul, right? I read an article that was talking about how, well, that was a mistake because how could you think of Judy Garland as anything but lovable? But that's not true. Judy Garland had a very tortured life, right? And we see that, that comes out in that interview, the way we hear her voice, the wording of that interview. So for me, I guess I just saw it as this, a moment to kind of look at how this other is demonized, and how another individual in this storyline has to deal with this notion of trauma and this notion of what's the other word I was thinking about? this notion of trauma and being interrupted so much, right? Because she is another woman who's interrupted through her mother, right? Through what her mother does, and through having to, sleep with these men to regain, to get this mother's daughter back to her, but also how she has to deal with love, how she has to deal with what's going on at that time in Korea, how she has to deal with the ignorance and the hatred of these men, of these military people, and how she has to deal with her own desire for love. I don't know. No. So I just, that's where I went with the whole episode. I guess for me, Tick was on the peripheral of that episode for me. I was just fascinated with her.
I feel like you're always like, yeah, Tick. And then you're like, but then there's these other characters. So I am not so. And I will say, like, the Judy Garland bit was beautifully done. And I will say that I enjoyed, it's one of those episodes where I thoroughly enjoyed watching certain parts, but I am so distracted by Tick by the end of it and thinking, like, so you just had this whole thing happen to you in bed, and then you came back to the States and didn't say shit about it to anybody, and you're acting, now I know why you don't act surprised when all this other stuff is going on. Like, this has already happened to you. And so, like, I will say, I completely agree with the whole, like, her relationship with her mother and, like, working through that, and her mother basically sacrificing her daughter to ruin her husband, but, like, because of what he did to the daughter. So I think there was, like, a whole complicated thing we can talk through later about that. But I just want to say I completely agree about the Judy Garland bit, and just the way they overplayed the music and the scenes, and just watching Jiha and, like, her conversations with other people, like, really learning about humanity through other people was very beautiful. And I'm still distracted by Tick because it was just so out of left field.
When I watch these things, I really focus on the writing. I really focus, because the writing is the most intentional part of the project, right? And what are the writers trying to get us to understand? What are they trying to say? And in this episode, I agree with everything you said. It was her story. At the same time, I felt like Tick was either stretched to the point of metaphor, right? It just stretched to the point where he was a poetic feature. We weren't even really talking about Tick anymore. Or they were trying to make him so world destroyed that he's an early Montrose. Or when he sees the future, he does not have a good looking future. He's hanging from something with a thing wrapped around his. So Stanford's comment last week about him being some kind of sacrificial lamb or not knowing what he is. We've been experiencing this whole show with Tick being a hero. Right? We've been assuming that that's what's going to happen, but they may be setting us up for some huge reversal here that we're not expecting. And we'll see if they if that all pans out, or there's something I'm not picking up on. But it's really stretched Montrose's character this episode to the point where it's either poetic or, damn, what really is it?
Well, one of the things that I struggled with this is that when I absorb this show as a just when I think of it in terms of the marks that you want for a good monster / horror film, right? And a good creature flick in which the creatures are like within human beings, and like the tension. I mean, and because we haven't really talked about when you start really getting into what she was as a monster, which is really interesting because she's being brought into, she's summoned, she's a spirit of vengeance and put in the form of one of the victims, right?
Right.
But when she does her 100th kill, she actually gets erased and replaced, and all that's left behind is the shell of the victim, and we don't even know if the shell of the victim has any memories or anything. So there's a huge, interesting dilemma that we're building up to with her, like, really what happens, right? All of that ambivalence, all that horror it's done immaculately well, and I have to give them credit for it. The problem is that the pieces that they built that immaculate form from were some of the ugliest stereotypes that I've seen having to do with Asian women. You know, I mean, when you start to, you know, I mean, this is Orientalism flat out. And then also the way in which it kind of makes light of comfort women is just like, that's not a nail in the coffin. That's a stake through the heart of an entire group of people. And so that was my trouble with this, is it while I could appreciate it hitting its marks, I also realized that it got to its marks in some very problematic fashions. And I mean, we can debate what's been happening with Tick for quite some time, right? And we have been. And, you know, right now, I mean, this show transformed how I'm going to view the rest of it. Because you know what? I'm rooting for the monsters to kill Tick. Period. End of sentence. Like I'm not rooting for him. Not only I'm not rooting for him, I'm rooting against him, right? Here on out, after what I just saw, right? There is nothing, they haven't explained to me the tragedy of what he did. We understand the tragedy of Jai, right? Because she's literally built around this, right? And she's going to a very tragic, to a potentially tragic end if you take the perspective of the monster. But that's where I'm stuck on this. I'm stuck in that place where it's like, you hit all the marks and you did it in one of the most problematic fashions that you could have, given what you were working with. I mean,
yeah,
darn.
A lot of problems with it. But I tell you what, I agree. I find myself now rooting for the supernatural in this show. I really don't root for the humans anymore in this. I'm rooting for the supernatural, because I think the supernatural is going to do something that, I don't know. You know, I was thinking ahead. I guess I woke up this morning around 3:30 this morning thinking about this show, and I started to think, I wonder if is this going to be a tale of what happens, how is humankind, which is so messed up, destroyed, and the supernatural rebuilds? I don't know, right? And I know we've had some really evil characters in the show, but right now I'm just so taken with the supernatural in this. And I wonder what the end story will be for the supernatural. Because I said from the beginning, and then I kind of wavered, that I didn't particularly care for Tick. But I think my not caring for, it's not like I don't like Tick, but I think I'm really liking whatever they're going to do with the supernatural with this now, right? I want to see the monsters. I want to see what they do.
I think to that point, Byron, also to Stanford's point, like one of my favorite quotes, I had two. One was, I think Gia said this to Tick outside. She said, "We both done monstrous things, but that does not make us monsters."
Yeah, that was
so I think, like, to your point, Byron, I don't draw a clear demarcation between the supernatural and the human, because I think all the people we've seen thus far are like a mixture of both. Because even, Gia's character, she, this whole episode was like, my daughter's in there. No, it's somebody else. And so I think that, and you guys heard me say it a number of times, like, I love the complexity. I love the fact that there's no clear cut. And like, even I would argue with Tick, like, not to say that, anything that he did was okay. But I also don't think we can ignore the context in which he did it. And so I think that there's so much, even where the supernatural is concerned, there's so much overlap that it's like, who are the humans and who are the supernatural people? Because even, she wasn't in this episode, but even like Letty, would we call her supernatural when she called on those ghosts in the basement? You know what I'm saying? So where is the line? Where's the boundary? And I feel like it's blurred, and that's what makes this show so amazing to me, is that there's so much, like, everybody a mess. Everybody got some reason that you would hate them or or love them or whatever, and it's just confusing. And I think the people who respond negatively to this might do that because they don't like that ambiguity. I want to know who's good, who's bad. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I think you're dead on. We see a poetic retelling of the human condition, if I can say that, right? And you guys, this idea of mixing the concepts of humanity and the supernatural, which are usually opposed to each other in their very definition, right? Now, by the way, when you look at Asian folklore, you don't have these strong separations between humanity and the supernatural, right? Kami exists in everything, and that there's no division there conceptually. And to get to your point, the quote I want to mention is when Ajia says, "I've done some horrible things I've tried to forget. When I'm with you, that seems possible, because you see the good in me, I know it's there." So what you have then is this social definition of self-goodness, and you have this social definition of redemption and value. And it's I do like this conversation because it's forcing us to examine how we look at what we're being told. Are we being told these are people as we usually conceptualize people? Are we being told these are kami, right? But what we're clearly being told is that every one of the characters is beautifully ugly, right? There's no character in here that's a saint. Maybe Hippolyta so far, maybe the daughter, the Diana, is that her name?
Diana.
Yeah, but everybody else is in the world completely, and by being in that world completely, end up being what I just like to call beautifully ugly.
Wait. George is a saint.
Yeah, but he's always up front, man.
I'm just saying, George, we
He
have
on
not
his
done any-
wife.
Did he
The difference between being on your wife though and being a war criminal. I mean,
What? No. We don't know the status of the relationship when he was doing that stuff. So we we do not touch George's sainthood.
All right, I give.
These are called the story Stanford tells himself, right?
But that's what I like. So that's what I'm liking so much about this too, is that there's so much that we still don't know. And that's what I'm having so much fun with this, so much fun with the show, is that all these things, it just made me think more about, okay, so, are we going back to, well, I won't say that because I try not to look at the previews for the next week, but whenever I turn it on, I see all these things happening that's going to happen this season. And I'm just waiting to see what happens with little D. Because I think there's something there also where I think there's going to be this kind of, the boundaries between the supernatural and the human. I think we're going to see it cross there also in some magnificent way. But I wanted to say also, well, maybe this is the time for me to ask Stanford this question. Stanford, you always have to have a question for you. So I wonder, and I'm all with you with the horrible, stereotypes and stuff that I think we see in this episode. Do you think that they were done on purpose, though? Do you think they could have been done on purpose to make a statement? I'm always kind of look for this, I'm always trying to read outside the text, I guess, and think, were they doing these things on purpose with this character?
No.
You don't think so? Because I go back to I keep going back to this line. I was so taken with the Judy Garland narrative, right? When she says, "Well, what kind of people are they? They're dead people. They tried to kill me along the way. By God, they won't. And I guess for me, I just keep wondering, did they have that whole thing? And I have the whole thing written down. I won't go into the whole thing that she said, but I wonder, was it them playing, and I know you said no already, but was it them playing around with this whole concept of Asian women and white women here, right? What am I trying to say here? That they're purposely playing with these stereotypes to make us think about how we look at Judy Garland in the films as this is what womanhood should be, right? But now let's play around with these stereotypes of this Korean woman. Right?
But I think that's the problem, right? And it's even in the way you described it. It's like talking about playing with stereotypes about Asian women. This is,
and white women though.
Right,
I mean,
right. But this is the problem. What they did And I actually backed into some of this because I was like, oh, I got to learn more about this monster. I got to look at what they were taken from. And what they really did was they're like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to Korea. They don't go to Korea in the books. And we're going to, so, okay, so we're going to do an Asian folktale monster. And that's the problem right there, right? What they did was they took similar iterations of something from China, Japan, and Korea and mixed them together. And we all know that the relations between China, Japan, and Korea, right. I mean, that's very distinct. Yeah. And so what it is they actually started by like putting forth this sort of polyglot Asian character as a representative of a very specific group. And then and when you do that, it also, what it does to like, in terms of the way they deal with the notion of comfort women, right? And not the notion, the way they employ references to comfort women, right? And then it's like the Asian woman as this sort of, as this temptress, right? I mean, they just, I don't think that they were. And the other thing that was interesting is if you look, is at least when I was looking at, like, they had an Asian writer who was working on this, but my understanding is he was Chinese. They didn't have a Korean, like Korean writers working on this, at least not in a prominent fashion. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the only one who would speak this, but it's like in some of the conversations that I had and some of the communications I had, they really didn't do a good job of representing her as Korean. Mm-hmm. I mean, so one of the things that came up in amongst some of the people I was communicating with was that the accents were really bad. That like there's just that like people who had a closeness to the culture had just started picking up all these small things that just didn't make sense in the cultural context, And there's one other thing that really bothered me was like even how they dealt with the whole tension with communism in Korea, right? They seem to be drawing a parallel between communism and being queer, and that was really problematic as well, right? So like there were all these things that they were playing with, and it's like I think the best you could say is that they didn't do the work.
Can I also just a random interjection?
Please go ahead.
When I was watching this episode, Cianna, I had your voice in my mind. I was like, how does this magic work? Like when she was with Tig and she saw the future, I was like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Why is it? And
so I'm just gonna go ahead and skip to my favorite scene, which was the end when we were with the shaman, and I was like, finally, answer. I was so excited. We actually saw the red fox. We had the shaman with this badass fedora. I was like, okay, let's get some answers here. I just found the mechanics of the storytelling of this episode very lazy and really, really confusing. And I was listening to what you were saying earlier, Vanessa. And I think you are right that sometimes when things, I feel comfortable when characters I feel more comfortable when characters and their intentions are clearly defined. Mm. But I don't think we're dealing with a moral gray area. I feel like there is a little bit of manipulation on the part of the writer's room, because the one thing that I hate when I'm watching a television show or I'm watching a movie and writers are telling me how to feel. I hate being told how I need to feel about a character. And what they do with Montrose, and they did it with Tick, is they show them doing these, horrible, unspeakable things. But we don't linger in a gray area. There is a hard pivot to making these characters once again broken and sympathetic, and there's just a lot of emotional manipulation there. And it drives me crazy. I mean, the casualness, the lack of context, where we have Atticus shooting this woman in the face. And he was about to shoot Jinha. He was going to kill her. And then we have this hard pivot to him being in the hospital and being frustrated and this, you know, wow, my father, and over again, my father. Tick is a character that I guess things happen to and he doesn't have to take any accountability for his actions. Is that what they're building up here? I just find it incredibly frustrating. I don't like it. And I think there is a manipulation there. Like Yahima, when Montrose killed Yahima, and then the next episode, you know, they're just building it up to be this very, very sympathetic character, and they sort of make these excuses that being, I don't know, their brokenness or their own personal struggle sort of justifies that rage, and I do not agree. I just don't agree.
I was only going to add to that too, Cianna, when you were going through his pivot, he doesn't even remember that he almost shot her. He doesn't recognize her.
He doesn't even recognize her.
And it's like, I don't know if they were, so I was talking to my husband about it, I was trying to figure out, like, are they going for, like, he just shuts down in those moments? And I remember my husband being like, do you really need a rationalization for that? Like, that's just, he doesn't even remember that he put a gun to her head and now he's in love with her. Like, that was hard to swallow, I think. Right. For me, you know, like, all of it, yes, of course, but he's just, his character seems to be, before this episode, someone who would at least remember pointing the gun in someone's face. And he doesn't. And then he's baffled when she's upset about it.
Right.
But my question too is then, like, so do we have the same feeling, for lack of a better word, towards Jiha in that she is now in love with someone who killed her best friend? Point blank, period.
It doesn't make any sense. He almost killed her and they're bonding over books, but then again, she doesn't understand love, and she doesn't understand, I mean, obviously, but this is what's really crazy. If she is like a goddess and a spirit of vengeance, I would hope that she would at least understand vengeance. But it seems that she's now she's the one in this like gray area where she doesn't understand love, but she also doesn't understand vengeance.
And that was my issue. It was like, so he gave her that whole date with the Judy Garland movie, and now she's okay with it.
It's all good.
I'm just like,
right. Well, and she says at that moment when they're arguing too, because she says, you know, I want to feel the lightning. And she's like, I saw you and I felt so angry, I felt lightning. And I was like, oh, so she's confusing high intensity emotion that she hasn't been feeling with love, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that, and I just remember, like, she was explaining to the one dude during speed dating, like, I want to feel the lightning, I want, and then she feels that when she sees him because she's so angry. So I just think she's confusing high intensity emotion with love. He makes her feel something, and she hasn't, like, she's been kind of searching for that. And so I think that could be where that line gets confused. And I think we've all been there where, like, someone just gets under your skin and it's hard to, you know, differentiate between in a good way or bad way, particularly if someone's experienced trauma. That is a line that gets very, very blurry very quickly. So I was just trying to answer Vanessa's question. My favorite quote was that you made me feel lightning. I was so angry. And her standing outside the building, looking at her bloody hands in the rain, that somehow got translated to, I love you.
And I guess, I know you want to go, Byron, just one quick little thing. My question then becomes, who gets to decide how she classifies her feelings? You know, so if she feels lightning and then it translates to love, who gets to decide, like, nah, girl, that's trauma. Nah, girl, that's, you know what I'm saying? And that's why I think for me, that's why I'm like, okay, yes, everybody just doing what they want to do. Like, y'all live your best life. You know what I'm saying? I think that's where the ambiguity is for me, is like, who gets to decide what, you know what I'm saying? Who gets to tell her whether she's a person or not? Who gets to tell her, girl, that ain't love. He killed your friend. I know he fine, but he did this. And you know what I'm saying? Like, who gets to decide?
Her mother said that to her. Her mother
tells her.
Her mother said, but he killed your best friend.
Yeah,
but girl, did you see them abs though? That's what she
that's a really good point too. Like, I think I immediately went to, like, oh, she's just confused, but that's really arrogant on my part to assume that it's confusion, right? And so I think that, yeah, I don't know, and I don't know what to do with that. I think that's what you were saying earlier about being okay with the gray, like.
But the jump is extreme. I mean, as we said earlier, we're still trying to figure out if these people are metaphors or humans, right? And we're watching this show thinking that these are stories about these people, but more and more as they spread out the amplitude of the tension, as they increase the ambiguity, I'm watching a beautiful poem, which I love, by the way. It's David Lynch as far as I'm concerned, right? Just bring on the poetry, I'm fine. Go ahead.
I kind of wanted them to explain, and I was actually, what had me most interesting was when we started to delve into sort of the psychology of jihad, right? It's like you are a spirit of vengeance is being put on this earth in the form of somebody else who is dead, and your knowledge of that dead person is the memories of the person who abused her. And so like that, and also like by the time she meets Tick, she's killed 99 men. No, I'm sorry, she's killed 90 men when she meets Tick, and then somehow between when she meets him and towards the end, she killed another 9 men in there. But that's a lot of that. Call me weird, but I think that's a lot of death to be dealing with. So I'm actually wondering, like, even how she classifies death, right? Because
their soul's going into her. She's living their lives very quickly. They're
right.
And our contextualization, our understanding of that part of her context is all cognitive. Right? We see her kill the one guy, but we're not there for the other 89. So we have to then infer those words that she's gone through all this, and then if we want to psychologize it, why she's experiencing all these things about love and hate and fear and rage. And sometimes when you got to throw it in with words, you guys called it lazy. I'm just going to call it they got an hour, right? And they want to tell the story, and they just don't have time to show us 89 more. They don't have us the time to show us the moment where Tick says, what the hell? No, I'm not going to shoot someone. I think we're supposed to experience at that moment, not that he has done that before, but that he has meted out violence in that way before. This is already part of who he is, and we don't get the backstory. That's if they want me to feel it as contextual, I'm going to stop here because I know Byron's been waiting to say something for about 5 minutes here.
No. I agree with you on that too. I think that, I think sometimes we have to be asked to fill in the blanks, but I do want to go back to what Leandra was talking about also. I think that you've all been talking about. I think also for me is that her character is one that is, and I'm going back to the movies again. I think so much about her is because she is almost childlike, is that she's learning how to deal or how to love, how to, what she thinks is love through the film, right? And I think that also becomes metaphorical, right? That's why we see so much about film, I think, in this episode, is because she's only learning these things, what she thinks is, or maybe what she feels is love, through how Judy Garland is in love with Gene Kelly, or how Judy Garland falls in love with, who was in Meet Me in St. Louis, I can't remember who the actor was, or an Easter Parade, right? How they fall in love and how they overcome things that might not be reality in real life, right? She's learning all these things through this what she sees on the screen, right? And there's lots of studies about, audience reception, and how we look at film, and how we might look at film the wrong way in a dangerous way. But I think those are the things that creates her, right? That builds her, that makes her maybe have that switch that quickly to being in love, to falling for Tick possibly. So I don't know. And I think I agree with Scott also on this notion of, that I think we're asked to fill in some of the story for the good or for the bad, right? With thinking about, I guess I've never had to think so much about this kind of series until now with you all. and to think about what's left out of this, right?
Right.
Which is wonderful. I love that. It's making me think more critically. But then when I get down to the whole brass tacks of making a show, you know, like Scott said, there's this 1 hour. So what do we do with this hour? You know, what can we put in this? But, you know, I do think there is something, you know, that has to be looked at more with the use of films and specifically musicals in this episode. And I think music throughout this, you know, throughout this show anyway, but specifically in this episode, you know, the kind of falsity of the musical, right, in American film, you know, how it romanticizes everything, pain and death and everything that we see in the musical, right? And I think that's what she, you know, that's what she learns from, I think.
I'm gonna actually suggest that might be a developmental theme for the show, in the sense, so in the last episode, right, we saw whiteness on display. And then Irving Goffman, the sociologist, used to talk about the front room and the back room, right? And the front room is the one in your house where you've set it up so that people can see you as you want them to. And then the back room is where you live your life, right? And maybe what we're seeing in all these different episodes is this front room, back room contrast, right? So the Julie Garland movie is her front room. That's what she's seen as, what she wants people to see her as. And in trying to get that, while she's living this incredibly traumatized, whatever we want to call it, life, that juxtaposition just doesn't provide a coherent space. And she swings, you know, rather violently in it. And a lot of people do, right? A lot of people swing violently between, I mean, how many times have we all said the wrong thing in the wrong place with the wrong people around? It's like, oh man, I'm never going to get that moment back, right? You've just given everybody a seat in your back room that you don't want them there. And those are very costly social moments. I mean, so maybe part of, I thought it was, as Stanford said, I thought this show was going to be situating historical Black trauma. That's what I thought it was going to be. And I thought it was going to be exploring stories we hadn't seen. And I think it was kind of bold to take that story out of the United States and talk about trauma in a non-US Black historical trauma way. I'm not saying they should have. I'm not saying I wanted them to. What I'm saying is, why that? You know, it causes us jarring that maybe causes us to focus more critically on other things going on in the other episodes. I thought it was risky, I'll be honest, to actually go to another culture and talk about their trauma. And does that magnify our understanding of historical Black trauma in the US? Does it detract from it? Again, I thought it was a bold maneuver, whether or not it was successful.
Well, it becomes a story also about patriotism and the patriarchal, right?
Yes.
Which are elements of racism and trauma in America.
Yes.
Right? It takes it outside of that, but it still sticks with these notions of patriotism and the patriarchal, right? Which are in elements of racism and trauma in the United States. So again, like I think it was risky, but I think, you know, that it would have those two themes, you know, to keep those two themes in mind when we think about war, we think about propaganda, we think about the musical, romantic musicals. All these things are based on, you know, these notions of patriotism, and the patriarchal.
So by showing the same themes in another culture, you amplify them in this culture, right? You bring them under a stronger light, if you like. So that makes it successful, right? I'm not sure everybody experienced it that way, but I appreciated the creative move. I'll leave it at that.
And I think we saw that in the scene outside with Gia, Tick, and then the other guy. And when she asked, "Have you ever met Judy Garland?" Yeah. And they kind of get her like, "Girl, no." And I think that was, to me, I was like, okay. And especially the the Korean American soldier and sort of just his. I wish we could have more of his experience because you
Yes.
talk about layers. Damn.
Yeah.
And
He was-
so I think that scene did exactly what you were just describing, Byron. It's like, even though it wears different faces, like racism does have this like common, and that sort of like oppression has a common thread, and it's just like, it's. I think they did. I really like that scene.
Well, just I really liked this character. I actually had him written down as my favorite character, and his name was Sung.
Oh yeah.
And my favorite line by him was he just says, where she asked why he doesn't just live there, and he says, in America I'm called a gook, in America I'm called a gook, in Korea I'm called Young Nam. Here or there I'll always be a foreigner, right? And what I loved about that was not just him describing his own being, but he was describing Atticus's at the same time. And that's the moment where it's like I felt like, okay, he had actually made that, they'd actually, in that moment, through some really good writing, had made that leap to describing describing what colonialism does. Right? It makes people foreigners in their own land.
Own country. Exactly.
But it also sends them to places where they're still foreigners, and the common theme is they are doing the will of the colonial power.
Yep.
We hear a similar quote about Black people in America. I think it's like, to be African American is to be African with no history and like American with no privilege or something. And
Yes.
I think like that's beautiful. Yes.
There you go. Okay, Cianna, why don't you tell us what you really liked about the episode?
This was not a favorite. I don't know.
I did have one scene that was really sweet. And I don't know, maybe it's just like a mother-daughter thing, like going back to the gender piece of this, but like when, after all the back and forth with the mother and the daughter, she walks in after Atticus leaves and finds Shiha sitting there crying, and she makes a decision to hold her and be a mom. Something about that broke me a little bit. Like, I totally understand everything about the episode. I love the Judy Garland overlay, but I also completely agree with all the other criticisms. If I could encapsulate just that moment, like that really, her recognizing that this is her daughter. She did this. She summoned this, she keeps calling it a demon. I don't think it's supposed to be a demon, but she summoned this vengeful spirit. She's taking ownership of what she's done, and she's giving it love. And I say it, but it's not, it's her giving her love. And I just thought it was so beautiful for her to just sit there and hold it. And then later when she says, I will sacrifice what I need for my daughter, and she looks at her like, those are just two very small moments where I was like, yes. Like, she's in this world because of you in two different senses.
Yeah.
And you're finally taking ownership of what that means. And I loved watching that happen. And I love just the way the actresses really put that sensitivity, and that she's still stiff when she's doing it. Like, she doesn't quite know how to do what she's doing when she's holding her daughter. It was just very well done. And I do appreciate sort of that grounding it in terms of their relationship that has been so antagonistic the entire episode. So I just wish I could pause those little moments, and if I just could walk away with just that.
Well, I think you're onto something. I think what was special about that moment was she finally took in her daughter's suffering, right? Her suffering had been overwhelming her own suffering forever, to the point where she brought suffering into her daughter's life in this bizarre way. And still her own suffering was so important to her that she just kept out the murders of all these people until finally she saw her daughter in a state of suffering that she just could no longer bear. That has something to do with what it takes for people to become empathetic every once in a while, right? Is to see suffering and to see someone be in this very vulnerable place. And then we have to decide, take it in or keep it out. And I thought it made sense that that's when she would overcome her own suffering a bit, or at least, finally allow her daughter's suffering to be part of who she was. And she always got away with not identifying with her daughter's suffering by othering her as a demon, right? Even though she created the demon, she still got to call it other. All right, and there's many layers to that transcend the entire show, right? Turning someone into a demon, it's your fault, but you blame them, you other them for being a demon, right? That could be another kind of thing that we're looking at here is.
Well, we think about how we demonize the other, right? It's a way of moving towards empathy as well, right? The study of how we demonize others, right? Or how we other the other. It is a move, it's a rhetorical move toward moving toward this empathy that you talk about, right? If we can recognize the kind of tropes that we put on people to other them, right? And this was a strategy used during wars, right? We other, from the bully pulpit, our presidents, our leaders, find ways to other or demonize and make those persons the enemy, so we feel like it's okay to go in and kill.
Yep.
Because we demonize them, because they become demons, right? And so it is, and I think this, what's this thing? And I think Leandra, to your point also, I think doesn't she say to her mother, you made me, or you called on me, so you made me your daughter, or you became my mother in that moment, right?
Right.
So, she's making her understand, you made me your daughter, you made yourself my mother. So you have to now participate in my life as my mother. And I think that makes her come to that, to that understanding if indeed her mother does. I think her mother does, because in that final shot, she says, I will, she basically says she'll sacrifice anything for her daughter. So I'm with you. I thought that was a beautiful, tender moment. I think it also makes us think about, how in this episode, she was, othered to the point where, she could have been easily demonized, but I think she was able to navigate that herself and to make her mother understand, you're the one that caused this, right? So you are my mother. You created me, to make her understand this. And again, I think it ties in for me with this notion of, I'm gonna go back to the supernatural again, right? It makes it this supernatural love. We think of supernatural as bad, but the supernatural can also be really good, right? We can pull out, what's his name? Richard, the gospel singer, who had that song out called it was a supernatural love, right? And it talks about this spirituality, or this the religiosity of love, right? Of what love really is. So there's something about this, I don't know, I guess the more I think about it, it's really a play with this notion of supernatural going on maybe in this show, and maybe the whole series, that is going to tie into something maybe unexpected. Maybe this supernatural is something different than what, maybe what we're thinking it is. I don't know.
Well, an earthly way that I think we talk about that kind of love every once in a while is in terms of selfless love, right? And once it's selfless, it's transcendent, right? In the sense that it's not so much about me, but it's about us as human beings. And now that we're talking about it, right? I don't have all these thoughts while I'm watching it and stuff, but now that we're talking about it, I love now the work that the mother had to go through, letting her daughter suffering it or not, coming to grips with the othering that she did, that created this daughter that she doesn't like. All I'm going to say is there's a lot of good content there for contemporary culture, right? Taking ownership of what you've done, taking ownership of the monstrous world you've created. You have to come to that space. If you can't come to that space, then you're protected and you don't grant empathy. I didn't see that when I watched it, but talking through it here, it's clear that they're giving us a lesson on what it takes for people to take ownership of the otherness they've created, right? And what's that?
He doesn't have to take ownership of anything.
I guess when you're beautiful, certain Benny's just come along,
Yeah.
When they had that scene in the tent and the projector starts and he's got the flowers and the cheesy grin, I was like, oh my goodness. Look at this. Are they serious right now?
That wasn't.
I know he did this horrible thing, but now he's going on a date. I just no.
All right, so now with you talking about that, I'm going to take another stab. Maybe that's the counter story to the story of the mother and the daughter. I mean, Tick tried to be in her world through the medium of the movies, right? He didn't ask her about her suffering. He didn't ask her about her lived life. He just encountered her at the level of Julie Garland, and then all these bizarre things happened later, or her mother's been dealing with her in the real world of human suffering the whole time. And maybe there is a parable there of how you get to owning your demons, and it's not by playing people's movies for them. I don't know.
I think what bugged me the most about this is that the show is pretty much been on an upswing as far as telling stories of oppression and racial violence. And when I say that I thought this episode was lazy, it relied on so many racist tropes that we've seen before. And there is this exoticism and mysticism around Asian culture and Asian women in particular that we've done this. We've been here before. It doesn't really even stand up anymore with just how mainstream, we'll say, Korean culture is, with K-dramas and movies and K-pop. I mean, there's nothing BTS. Mystical about that. There's been so much work done to sort of, break down those barriers and say, hey, we're just like everyone else. We like pop music like you like pop music. We like ridiculous dramas. We read the same books. We read the same comics. And it just felt like huge leaps backwards. I don't know why she was naked the whole time. The sex scenes were so long and so gratuitous and graphic. I was just bored. I was just, you know what I mean? And I guess I'm a little disappointed because, the show does have a Black, showrunner. But when we talk about, culture and nationality and ethnicity and nationality, I mean, I found that this was incredibly American storytelling. And I don't know if that necessarily has to do with, you know what I mean? I don't know if it's necessarily looking at Asian American culture through the lens of African American culture. I just thought it was looking at Asian American culture through the lens of American filmmaking. And it was just kind of like, I wanted better. And my homegirl, who is Korean, Caroline, who loves this show, she's so sweet. She said that Jamie Chung's accent was atrocious. That her Korean was bad. Bad, like beyond bad. So, I mean, I can't comment on that, but that is what Caroline said.
That is disappointing to hear. Yeah, I wouldn't have noticed either, but that's...
She said it was very, very bad. She said it was so bad that it was the only thing that she could focus on, and she doesn't remember a lot of what happened during the episode. And then she said, but I'll just find out when I tune into Seers of Ardham. So,
wow. And thank you for that too. Awesome. Like I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have picked up on that.
Right.
It's good to have that perspective. And
when they interviewed the CGI guys, they were saying that they were talking about all the way they broke down how they're going to do the monster, and they were really obsessed with sex in the creators, right? So they're like, well, she's got to have 9 tails. And so they're like, she has 9 tails because she has 1 tail for every orifice, and it always comes out of the largest orifice. They actually laid out the rules that the first tail to come out comes out of the largest orifice. It's very hentai from Japan to do that type of stuff with tentacles and things like that.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, it does not match up with the Korean version of the spirit that I read about.
Yes.
Well, but the advantage they get is when she has him fully suspended by 9 tails and you're looking at the shadows. That's basically a Lovecraftian creature with tentacles consuming someone, right? So I thought, oh, this is so cool. They're going to turn Asian folklore into Lovecraftian cosmic horror. Yes. And then none of that happened. So, or maybe it didn't, I didn't get it. But at least in the book, there's a creature that opens up like a clam and just shoots out tentacles at people and pulls them in. And I thought, okay, well, it's tentacles.
Right. I need to read this book. There's like a vagina with tentacles. Is that what I just heard?
Not a vagina. I don't think it was I don't know. But...
There is anime.
No, the show has a vagina with tentacles, but the
I
book
got
does
it
not.
mixed up. Okay.
The show also had a snake penis. I don't know what would happen if those like were.
It's you never need. Very interested to see what transpires because they made it very clear that Jing-Han will be back, and I want to see how we go from tentacles to him beating the absolute crap out of her in hand-to-hand combat, as we had that flashback from episode, was that episode 1?
Yeah. No, episode 2.
It was 2 there.
She comes out of the closet.
Episode 2. Mm-hmm.
And then we know that when he calls her at the end of the last episode, he saw the word die, and he says to her, "How did you know?" So that means that didn't she tell him in this episode, "You're going to die a horrible death" or something like that?
If you go back, you'll die.
Yeah. So, I'm kind of at the camp that I'm kind of expecting a Watchmening of me, and they're going to give me something that I did not anticipate at all with Atticus. And this idea of cosmic love defeating cosmic hate is something I can buy into in a heartbeat. So we'll see if that's sort of where they go with it.
Yeah, but I mean, the funny thing is as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about my other favorite quote, and how it's actually like it actually to me translates to a meta comment. This is the reason why I'm going to have trouble with Atticus throughout the rest of this journey. It's that moment where it's that moment where they're arguing back and forth, and where after she reveals that or reminds him that he happened to have killed her friend by shooting her in the face, and she says to him, "There's no book for you to escape what you've done."
Mm-hmm.
And when she said that, I was like, that was it for Atticus for me. Because so far, so much of this has been actually about, it's not just been about figuring out the line between the super and the natural, but it's also been about the power of the book. It's been about the text. It's been about the word, right? And so when she said that, she's like, there's no book, there's no word, there's nothing that can redeem you. And she said that both literally and in a metaphorical way, where I'm like, or like in my mind, I also started thinking about like how I can more easily forgive her for killing 99 men with her 9 tails than I can him, because of like just like my feeling about their subjectivity and awareness.
Didn't
and at that point,
that, when did she say that? Was that when she was outside?
Yes.
And then they proceed to date after that? I mean, didn't she like forgive him?
I'm not saying.
Was it like shit on it after that? I mean, this is my problem with this.
Love is a powerful
before
drug,
she
man.
says that she felt lightning. So there was that conversation, and then she said she felt lightning, and the whole thing shifted.
Okay.
Love is a powerful drug. That's just all there is to it. One of the things about love is you can't help yourself. That's why it's love. You cannot think yourself out of it. You can run away, but it's love because you can't control it. So I'm not trying to justify anything anyone. I'm just saying, we fall in love with who we fall in love with. Nothing we can do about it except not be there. Or we can spend a lifetime trying to change them, right? Which some people do, right? Anybody else have anything else they want to talk about in this episode?
I have a quote that I really appreciated. It was from the best friend, the one who got shot. I think her name was Yoon Ja. But she said, "There's nothing wrong with being different. What's wrong is all of them vilifying us for it. We're all the same. We're all human." Damn, yo. We're all the same. We're all human. Like, I could do without that. But I think the first part of it, and it's something that comes up in therapy for me a lot with clients in terms of what you do, your behaviors, your actions are not necessarily the issue. It's the value that you place on them and how you sort of make sense of them. And I think that quote was just so beautifully, it was beautiful to me. It really spoke to me. It really spoke to what we're dealing with now with intolerance and divisiveness, where difference is not the issue. It's the value that we place on difference that's the issue. And I think
Absolutely.
And then she said it and then she died. It was just, I liked it. I think she was she was like a tragic hero.
So now time for some viewer mail. Omale 2 says, I listened to this analysis as well as the companion podcast from HBO, and I appreciate that both enlighten me. I've never been this intrigued about a TV series and its analyses. What are your thoughts on the forms that both Ruby and Christina chose to take? And I like her emphasis on the idea of chose to take. All right. Ruby's choice seemed tame compared to Christina's exaggerated Hitler youth form. Has anyone mentioned the possibility that Christina may be Black? Peace.
She's not Black.
So what do you guys think?
And Ruby did not choose that form. That was the form that was given to Ruby. Ruby woke up after a night with William, and she woke up as Hillary.
That's interesting. That's so interesting you say that, because I mean, I don't like to be one of those in the book people, but in the book people, she basically takes a potion and ends up. The only choice she made was to look like a white woman. That's the only choice that she made. What that form took, I don't remember the book discussing what that would look like.
But I felt like what was happening is that she was taking the form of something that that was representative of a subconscious desire, right? Because when I saw, I mean, everything about the character really was about bumping up against, for good or ill, bumping up against whiteness, right? And I think that, and so I think that I just think that like, so her becoming a white woman seemed not just poetic, but almost like it was expressing some sort of deep-seated desire.
And that's how I saw it too, because she wanted to be at that department store and she wanted to be one of the women who worked there. And so like, if you were going to go with your deep-rooted desire, you would probably go for that goal that would get you that goal, which would be a white woman. Yeah, I didn't think of it as a choice though, in terms of like, she chose that. And I think that I just read it as like, working your way up the power structure. So Christina becomes a white male because it gets her what she wants. She wants into this exclusive gentleman's club. So she's a white man.
And a white man that looks just like her. Like,
right. And it's Aryan, like super Aryan, super like fit, you know, like.
No, those are interesting choices, because if we follow Stanford's line of reasoning and Ruby's subconscious had an impact on what she was like as a white woman. This was a white woman that fit in all the right spots and could push power. Not the way Christina can, right? Because Christina's power, as Stanford said earlier, is all contextual. She only has power in certain spaces. This woman was subtle enough to be able to move through this white world and actually push white strangers in certain ways. She wasn't just a Hitler-looking youth that people looked at and walked away from, or, you know, what was her name? Hillary? Hillary didn't seem as binary white as William, if that phrase makes any sense. And of course, it got her to the stiletto scene, which, you know, you can't do that if you look like, I don't know. Anyone else want to comment on that question? Okay, well, Omawala2, thank you very much for writing in. We very much appreciate it. And please do so for our next episode. So that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Brothers and sisters, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we will start with Vanessa.
I'm on Facebook and Twitter at Dr. Vanessa Hintz, and on Instagram at Dr. Vanessa Hintz.
Fantastic. Stanford.
I'm Stanford Carpenter, and you can find me on Facebook and Twitter at SW Carpenter. That's SW Carpenter.
Cianna.
Cianna Greaves. You can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's at CICIGREAVs and Victor, ESs and Sam.
Byron.
Byron Craig. On Instagram, I'm Byron Steve, no space. And on Twitter, I'm at Byron B. Craig, and on Facebook under Byron Craig.
Oh, fantastic. Leandra.
You can find me on Twitter at Parris Leandra, Parris with 2 R's, not like France, and Instagram, Leandra Parris.
Excellent. And I'm Scott Jordan, and you can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the Seers of Ardham at the Dark Loops Production channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast, please leave it below on this YouTube page or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com. We'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember,
Justice
for Breonna Taylor.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing brain drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing.